I'm doing the Videocast podcast a bit earlier this week because of the all-day event I'm doing in London at the Brixton Academy on Saturday. And I want to start today by looking at this manufactured controversy surrounding the television personality Noel Edmonds. He found out what happens to you when you step out of the box or step off what I call the postage stamp consensus. Now, if you go to my YouTube channel and look at a Videocast trailer that I did, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, about an appearance that I made on a BBC current affairs program, you'll see me explain in detail what I mean by the postage stamp consensus and how it comes about. But briefly, it is the term I use for the mass download from cradle to grave of the perception of normal. And it starts when you leave the womb and your parents influence you on the definition and perception of normal. And of course, normal is only what people normally experience. Not everyone's normal is the same normal. Then you go into what is bravely called the education system, and you get the state's download of normal for all your formative years. Then you go out into the world and you go into maybe the professions like journalism or politics or science and medicine. And you take with you that base download of normal, this postage stamp consensus. And I use the term postage stamp because its perception of the possible is so tiny, it is laughable. And as long as you keep to that consensus, then no one laughs at you and people think you're credible. Oh yeah, because everyone's agreeing that their version of normal is normal. It's nonsense, but it's perceived as normal. Now, when you step off the postage stamp, because you don't accept that that is the only possibility or a definition of normal, then the postage stamp disciples are all over you. Ridicule, condemnation, condemn him, and all that stuff, right? I've had 25, 26 years of it, and I quite enjoy it. Actually, it's quite funny to see how myopic and programmed people can be with such a narrow perception of potential reality. It's just extraordinary to me. Anyway, Noel Edmonds has found out in the last few days what happens when you step off the postage stamp consensus. What he did was suggest that your attitude can affect your health. Whoa, crikey. That's way out there, isn't it? I mean, of course it does. But no, it's too much for the postage stamp consensus. And he also suggested that a machine that he's used, basically an electromagnetic machine, was an aid. He didn't say it was the cure, it was an aid in his survival or removal, if you want to call it, of a cancer that he had. Well, as the comedian Peter Kay said, you'd have thought he'd have walked into your house on Christmas Day and pissed on your kids. It was ridiculous, the idiotic response and the condemnation of him for having that opinion. An opinion, by the way, that can be supported by the nature of reality and how electromagnetic technology can make you ill and it can make you well, depending on the kind of energy, the kind of frequencies that it's giving off. But I'll get into that and how this works. I mean, I don't know about Noel Edmonds' machine. I've never seen it, never used it. But I'll talk about the principle on which this kind of stuff works. And I've been treated endlessly for decades now with electromagnetic and electrical technology. And all I can say is its effects on my health and removing ill health has been absolutely stunning. But let's first of all look at this reaction. Oh dear. The postage stamp disciples were beside themselves. And it's always sad, one way of putting it, pathetic is another way, of seeing slaves to the system running around defending the system that enslaves them. And that brings me to Jan Moyer, a journalist, says here, it must be true, on the Daily Mail newspaper. This was the headline: Noel Know-All, or Noel the Know-All, insults every victim of cancer. What? By looking at possible causes of it and possible remedies for it, how is that insulting anyone? I'll tell you what's insulting the victims of cancer, and that is having trillions and trillions of dollars spent decade after decade after decade, given in tins and given in endless ways to apparently find a cure for cancer. And after all that money, all that research, we're still left basically with poison, what one doctor called weed killer, chemotherapy, which destroys the immune system and opens you up to further cancer in the future and endless other diseases or problems, which the immune system would normally sort out. And radiation. What is one of the known causes of cancer? Radiation. I know, let's treat cancer with radiation. And after all this money, and we're still stuck with that, the World Health Organization has warned that worldwide cancer cases are expected to soar by 70% in the next 20 years. But don't let's explore, don't let's debate other ways of dealing with this cancer other than the scalpel, chemotherapy, and radiation. Anyway, Jan Moyer speaks. She starts, after a long course of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, a friend of mine has been given some bad news. The grueling treatment has failed to wipe out his cancer, and now he must have a bone marrow transplant, which is very sad for her friend. But she's starting out an article which is about to condemn Noel Edmonds for talking about what he believes works for him and what he believes can be a contributory factor to cancer, which is our state of being, our state of mind, our state of emotions. She starts it out with an example of someone who has had the so-called conventional treatment, the chemotherapy and the radiotherapy, And it hasn't worked. It's extraordinary, the thought patterns these people must go through. Okay, I wonder how her friend, she says, and cancer sufferers like him must feel upon hearing Noel Edmonds chirp that cancer is caused by negative energy. Well, first of all, Miss Moya, how do you know it's not? Well, the postage stamp consensus says it's not. Yeah, but the postage stamp consensus is stupid. And how must he be feeling? Well, maybe he might think, well, I'm going to have a look at this because maybe there's something in it. No, we must be upset. We must be outraged. This week, she says, the 67-year-old broadcaster seemed to be suggesting that cancer patients only have themselves to blame for becoming ill. I mean, now I'm outraged. No, he wasn't saying that at all. God, yeah, these people. The Deal or No Deal, that's a game show for people around the world, host alleges that he tackled his prostate cancer with something called an MPAD, a machine which aims to stimulate cellular resonance in the body. I'll get to all this before I finish this. The makers themselves make no such claims, but Edmonds insists the electromagnetic box, which sends waves through copper coils in a body mat, was central to his recovery. Now, Miss Moya won't know this, but the reason that people like the manufacturers of this and people throughout the alternative health arena do not make claims and step back and distance themselves from claims made by others about what they produce. The reason all that happens is because although the big pharma cartel can put adverts on the television and tell you in detail what their products do or supposed to do, in the alternative arena, thanks not least to the European Union, by the way, it's a criminal offence for them to make any claims, even if what they're saying is backed up by laboratory studies. So when someone comes out, a famous name like Noel Edmonds in Britain, and says this machine's, the manufacturers of the machine are going to go, whoa, oh no, we're not claiming that, we're not claiming that, for the very reasons that I've just described. The Daily Mail lady goes on. He went on to say, talking about Edmonds, that he was very, very healthy now and only got his cancer because I had gone through a very stressful, very negative period in my life, which, for reasons I'll come to, makes absolute sense. By using pulsed electromagnetism and a series of other things, I'm now free of prostate cancer. And then comes a wonderful example of the mental maturity of so many mainstream journalists. She says, honestly, he's had the Wonder Machine for years and he never did anything to help cure Mr. Blobby's skin complaint. Shame on him. For people around the world, Mr. Blobby is a comedy character that appeared with Noel Edmonds. And for Jan Moya's reference, it was a bloke in a suit, right? Got it? Maybe not. But that's the level we are. Here we're talking about something extremely serious and relevant to people's lives. Oh, Mr. Blobby. On a more serious note, oh, thank goodness for that. No respectable doctor in the world thinks that negative attitude causes cancer. Okay. How can she say that when there are so many apparently respected doctors in the world. And this is the other thing, you see. With the postage stamp consensus, only doctors know anything about health. Only scientists know anything about reality. It's not true. It's not even nearly true. I mean, it's staggeringly untrue. But it's the postage stamp consensus perception of truth. And because these journalists, like this lady, are postage stamp disciples, their version of everything is based on the fact that only doctors know about health and only scientists know about reality. And then she goes on about Edmonds's mumbo jumbo that gets printed next to horoscopes in a supermarket magazine. Basically, that's not good when it comes to life-threatening diseases such as cancer. No, the chemotherapy and radiotherapy that didn't work for your friend is what we should be talking about in terms of the only credible treatment for cancer. And then Edmonds went on a morning television program, been on it myself, to be interviewed by a guy called Philip Schofield and a lady called Holly Willoughby. It's a program called This Morning, you know, that bastion of brain cell activity. And as usual, Edmonds was saying something different to the postage stamp. And these two are postage stamp disciples, like almost everyone else in their profession. And thus, they had to be outraged, like the public have been told to be outraged, because that's what happens all the time, you know. You know, so many things go past people, but then suddenly they're told to be outraged. You must be outraged about this. You must be outraged at what this Noel Edmonds has said. Oh, yes, I'm outraged now. And of course, these people who are always looking for their public image, they also have to be outraged, just like the public's been outraged and told to be outraged when they interview people who they've been told to be outraged about. And so Noel Edmonds called the interview a stitch-up. He wasn't allowed, he said, to answer questions at any length. I know that one. And that the interviewers weren't listening to what he said. Well, of course they weren't. That's how it works. My goodness me. I could write the manual on it. And by the way, in connection with that article, in my new book, Phantom Self, I quote a guy called Dr. Richard Day a number of times through the book, because what he said to a group of doctors in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1969 about how the world was going to change and how the world was going to be transformed has been so staggeringly accurate in terms of how the world has changed since, in detail, great detail. As not only in Phantom Self, I'm going into all this in the World Tour events. And one of the quotes he made in 1969 was this. Dr. Richard Day was a big-time Rockefeller family insider. He was an executive of Planned Parenthood, which was a Rockefeller organization. He said, "We can cure almost every cancer right now. Information is on file in the Rockefeller Institute if it's ever decided that it should be released." And he said it wasn't being released because we've got to keep the population down, and they might as well die of cancer as anything else. So from that point of view, the World Health Organization projection of a massive increase in cancer, not least through all the radiation in the atmosphere now, and the food that people eat and what's in the water, etc., is a very good thing from their point of view, because they're deeply, deeply sick. And of course, the last thing this system wants, run by people like that and the people that control people like that, is actually a real cure for cancer. That's why all this money is spent, all this research is done, and basically we get no further, except here and there in some areas. And then this was also in the Daily Mail. It was an interview with Noel Edmonds, "Negative Energy and How I Invited My Little Friend Cancer to Leave Me." And it's by this lady, Rebecca Hardy, another postage stamp disciple, who basically took the piss through this article, been there myself, and as I've said many times, being called mad by an idiot is a compliment. And the great irony is that in the same paper, not just the same paper, the same edition as this, was this article, which they took absolutely seriously. And why, it will become clear in a minute. Headline: How the way a man rows with his wife shows which illness he'll get in old age. And this, in the same paper as that piss take of Noel Edmonds, is taken deadly seriously. Okay, here we go. It's no great surprise that bickering with your other half can have an impact on your health. But just how serious depends on what type of row you have, scientists have found. Research shows that the way husbands and wives argue can be linked to specific health problems later in life. When you argue, what are you exchanging? Negative thought, negative emotion. Therefore, what are you inflicting on your own body? Negative thought, negative emotion. And these are postage stamp people who are accepted as the fountain of knowledge by the postage stamp consensus media, saying that, in effect, thought and emotion, negative thought and emotion, what I would call imbalanced, disharmonious thought and emotion, affects your health in some detail, which it does. And that's what Edmonds was saying. Nothing more. Anyway, it says scientists, keyword, scientist, he must be credible. This is these for the postage stamp consensus, you see, these are key trigger words. So it's like scientist. Oh, he's a scientist. He must know about what he's saying. Try this one. Doctor. He's a doctor. He must know about health. No one else does. Only doctors. It's like living in a world of software programs. Just repeating the program. And the reason that they're taking the piss out of Noel Edmonds, and they take the piss out of me, is because I haven't been through their postage stamp consensus and bought it. But this man, or these people that are saying the same as Edmonds, they're scientists. Oh, okay. Well, we better sit up and listen then. Scientists say they can determine some husband's medical complaints for 20 years following a 15-minute argument. So negative thought and emotion doesn't have a lot of an effect then. Same paper as the hat. It's hilarious. The link between emotions and health outcomes was most pronounced for men, but some of the key correlations were also found in their wives. The study, which tracked the lives of 150 heterosexual couples since 1989, revealed outbursts of anger can predict heart problems later in life. And shutting down emotionally, or stonewalling, during arguments increases the risk of ailments such as a bad back or stiff muscles. Lead author Claudia Haas of the University of California in Berkeley, you see, University, Berkeley, must be taken seriously. We looked at marital conflict conversations that lasted just 15 minutes and could predict the development of health problems over 20 years for husbands based on the emotional behaviors that they showed during these 15 minutes. Professor Haas added, our study shows that these different emotional behaviors can predict the development of different health problems in the long run. senior author Robert Levinson said, "For years we've known that negative emotions are associated with negative outcomes for health." So why is everyone taking the piss out of Noel Edmonds? He's just saying the same. Oh, he presents a game show. This is a scientist. But truth is truth is truth, whoever says it. And bollocks is bollocks, whoever says it. However many letters they have after their name. He says, this is one of the many ways that our emotions provide a window for glimpsing important qualities of our future lives. It's freaking hilarious. So, how does all this work? The postage stamp consensus has a version of reality, even though quantum physics shows it to be nonsense, and a version of the human body, which is, and I'm being optimistic, in the Stone Age. When you look at reality, it's dominated at our level of it anyway by electricity and electromagnetism. It's the way information is communicated. It's the way thoughts work. I mean, how does the brain work? With electricity. How does it communicate? With electricity. How does DNA communicate? With electricity and frequency and vibration. Nikola Tesla, a real scientist who died penniless in a hotel room in New York in 1943 because he was a real scientist challenging the postage stamp, and who in effect gave us the basis of our electrical systems to this day. He was creating technology and showing it to work that was tapping into these electromagnetic levels of reality and turning it into usable warmth and power, which those behind the power industry did not want, because basically they could once the machine was made that was interacting and with the electrical level of reality and turning it into usable warmth and power. Once you had the machine, it didn't cost anything because it was just using natural phenomenon to give you your power. It's the last thing the power companies want or wanted. That still wanted, and that's why he ended up penniless in a New York hotel room in 1943. And by the way, those same forces that are saying we must get rid of fossil fuels because of global warming, that hoax, they're the same people who are suppressing this free energy technology that Tesla was using in the first part of the 20th century. And he knew that everything was vibration, everything was energy, everything was electromagnetism at our level of reality. And so, to give you an example, it's come out actually only in the last couple of weeks. Scientists said it, so it must be true. Which is a classic example of what I'm talking about. This is the headline: "You better believe it. Dancing hares lead bumblebees to pollen by sensing electrical signals given out by flowers." How bumblebees find flowers to gather nectar and pollen was largely a mystery until now. Scientists, sits up, takes notice, have found tiny vibrating hairs may explain how the industrious insects sense and interpret signals transmitted by flowers, leading them to the plants so they can gather pollen. While it was known that flowers communicate with pollinators by sending out electrical signals, experts were previously unsure how bees detect the fields. How bumblebees find flowers to gather nectar and pollen was largely a mystery. Now scientists have discovered that static electricity causes the hairs to move and helps the bees to find a source of pollen. Now, if I'd have said that, or someone else who's not a scientist would have said that, before these scientists said that, and I've been writing and talking for years about all this electrical phenomenon, electrical communication that we're all part of, then we would have been crazy and to be dismissed. But a scientist says it. Ooh. And all this is an example of what I'm talking about, and I've been writing about for years, the way electricity and electromagnetism is the way that information is communicated, that allows the reality that we experience to be. And it's the same principle as a computer. You've got the information going around a computer electrically, and when it's all working in balance, then the computer's working perfectly. When that electrical communication gets disturbed, disharmonized, distorted, you see the result on the screen in a distorted projection of whatever you're looking at. Or you'll say, oh my goodness me, my computer's so slow today. Yes, because the information is not being communicated to the optimum extent and speed through the electrical communication system of the computer. Now, as I've said, we, if you like, human bodies work in the same way. This is a biological computer. I even heard a scientist call it a biological computer recently. I fell off my chair. I've been calling it that for decades. Because the brain works electrically, DNA works electrically. This is an electrochemical organism. And if the electromagnetism, electrical, is not working properly, if it's disturbed or distorted or disharmonized, then so is the chemical, and so is the rest of the body. And we call that dis-ease, disease, disharmony. And this can be disharmonized by radiation, by stuff in the food and stuff in the water, because just as the electrical and electromagnetic affect the chemical affect the other way. And so when you look at acupuncture, what does it do? It's putting in needles along meridian lines of energy, which is just like the motherboard on a computer. And it's directing and balancing the flow of this energy through these meridian lines of the body, so that the body is an electrical, electromagnetic, informational harmony. And these acupuncture meridians go in circuits. So you might have a blockage in the circuit, which eventually goes through the head, in the foot. And thus that affects the head because of the blockage in the foot. So when people say, well, it's stupid, that acupuncture, they're putting needles in your foot to help a headache. Well, if the blockage that's causing the headache is in the foot, there ain't a lot of sense in putting a needle in your bloody head, is it? I mean, ridiculous. But I see, arrogance and ignorance, they always work in pairs. And so people who have not taken the trouble to find out what they're talking about then condemn others who have. So we have a situation where if our electromagnetic levels are in imbalance, we are healthy. If they're out of balance, and it can happen for many ways, and it can happen through thought and emotion. Thought and emotion are expressions of frequency which express themselves electrically and electromagnetically. Thoughts can be electrically measured, right? And electrical frequencies going out from the brain, going out from the body through emotions, can destabilize if they're involved in fear or anxiety or depression. They can destabilize the electromagnetic balance of the body, which then reflects through to what we call physical dis-ease in some way or other. Now, going the other way, if you have electromagnetic technology that's properly effective and used in the right way, it can emit frequencies which balance out and harmonize the imbalances, which take you from being imbalanced and dis-eased into a sense or a state of balance and health. I'm not saying for a word that for a moment rather that every one of these machines works brilliantly like every other one. But I've been on these machines, not the one Noel Edmonds talking about, but others. And the effect on my health has been fantastic and so quick, it's unbelievable. Often, not always, but often, in my experience, it's been so fast. And now the EU is desperate to ban them because the EU is just a front on the health issue anyway for the big pharma global pharmaceutical cartel that wants rid of anything that is alternative to its scalpel, drug, radiation, multi-billion bonanza feeding off human ill health. So when you look at this principle of electromagnetic balance, electromagnetic imbalance of the body, this explains why you get more people, often, these groups of people that get cancer around nuclear power stations that are leaking radiation than you do in the general population. And you get more of rare types of cancer because the radiation is impacting upon the electromagnetic field of the people that are in that area. And so you get more effects of that. All this electromagnetic technology that is now dominating society is doing the same. Having pulsing electromagnetic energy frequencies at your ear all day long, I mean, that's not going to cause a problem. Are you having a laugh? And science, you see, says, oh, there's no known link between nuclear power stations and nuclear power leaks and a greater prevalence of cancer. Well, those deep in the inside, they absolutely know that there is a cause and effect, and they know why there's a cause and effect. They just don't want us to know. But the great body of so-called experts are so clueless about the electromagnetic nature of everything, and therefore its cause and effect possibilities, that they can't understand how being near a nuclear power station could affect you in terms of your bodily health. Well, what it does is it affects your electromagnetic balance, and through that your health. I mean, it's so simple. But what science says is if we can't explain it, it can't be happening. All the time you basically hear that mantra. So what has happened to Noel Edmonds this week is a classic of the way the postage stamp consensus works. You squeeze people's perception of the possible. You squeeze people's perception of reality and thus the possibility of changing reality. And then you turn them into not just sheep, but sheepdogs, keeping all the other sheep in line, as Edmonds has found this week. And you ignore all these other possibilities, not just in treating health, but in endless other things that could be making this world a much nicer, better, healthier place, because it doesn't suit your agenda. That's your agenda. You don't want people here. And so when people like Edmonds and me in the last 25 years step off this postage stamp consensus, well, all the disciples are there. And you know, a question you never hear when you see these kind of scandals going on. Oh, condemn him. Simple question. It's what intelligent people would ask. Does it work? Does it work? Whether it's this machine or whatever, does it work? A doctor said it can't. Well, doctors don't understand what the body is, for goodness sake. Think for yourself. So, anyway, I'm going to be talking about all this at the weekend. at the Brixton Academy, among vast other connected things. And when you look at reality as it really is, as opposed to what we're told it is, then mysteries galore just fade away and become obvious in terms of understanding them. We might even solve the mystery of why or how so many mainstream journalists manage somehow to summon the brain power to breathe every few seconds. I look on in astonishment when I read articles like that they can manage it. Oh, I'm going blue, what's happening? You forgot to breathe again. Breathe. Oh, thank you. You're a journalist, aren't you? Yeah, how did you know? Intuition.